As I said last night, it's a scandal that every single state premier has refused an invitation to the official reception in Canberra next Monday for King Charles and Queen Camilla on their visit here. Victoria's premier said today she was just too busy.
His schedule was such that his visit is confined to Canberra and Sydney, and my schedule is such that I'm just not able to make the reception next Monday.
Now that's nonsense. Alan could hold a cabinet meeting the day after or even first thing that morning. Same with other premiers making the same excuse. Now this seems really a political decision by the premiers, all but one of them Labor and Republican. Joining me from London is writer, broadcaster and commentator Esther Krakue. Esther, great to see you again. Is this an issue at all in Britain?
Yes, I think here in the UK we're quite surprised actually that this is the attitude of many Australian politicians, particularly because support for republicanism is actually the lowest it's ever been over the last couple of decades, and I'm sure it's going to fall even lower when Prince William becomes king. So this is a classic case of politicians not wanting to actually reflect what the public wants, which is peculiarly something we struggle with in Britain as well. It seems like these politicians are elected and they just do what they want and they forget about the people that elected them. But this is clearly what we're seeing in Australia right now. I mean, I think it sets a quite bad precedent. It leaves a quite bad taste in people's mouths that this is the way that Australian politicians are choosing to treat the king and queen, who made it very clear that they were very excited to go to Australia, and that it's a high priority for them, considering as well the king has cancer and he's still recovering from cancer. He's flying all the way from the UK whilst undergoing cancer treatment, and it's quite unfortunate as well. We know that Australians really supported Princess Catherine as she went through her own sort of cancer treatment, and the reception for her recovery has been very high. So it's quite peculiar that this is how Australian politicians are choosing to treat the king and queen. Of course, they could have made time in their schedule. It's not impossible to free up a few hours to greet the king and queen after that flying well over 24 hours to visit them. But I suspect that there will be some sort of public backlash, and Britons understand it. I mean, there are many Britons that live in Australia and vice versa. I believe the number is over 1 million. This is why you saw David Cameron going to Australia during the election to try and get British voters to vote for the Tories. So relations are still very strong, and they're only getting stronger. There's a lot of Australian investment coming into the UK from the investment summit, if Keir Starmer is to be believed. And these are the kinds of things that could sour relations. Perhaps not to a significant degree, but it just shows where the politicians' priorities lie. This is what happens when activism and ideology takes over and replaces practicality and actually the will of the people.
Yeah, well, if you're commenting about it in England, you take it from me that a lot of people here think it's absolutely churlish, and you make a good point. They're representing themselves rather than their people, or indeed their positions, since every one of them swore allegiance to the monarch. Esther, neither of us, I mean, we've talked about him a couple of times, neither of us has been impressed by your new Foreign Secretary, what we'd call a Foreign Minister, David Lammy. He used to call himself a Caribbean and demanded reparations from Britain. Here he is.
I'm afraid, as Caribbean people, we are not going to forget our history. We don't just want to hear an apology, we want reparation.
Now, that radicalism has put him on the spot, Esther, as you know, because there's a meeting of Commonwealth heads of government in Samoa next week, and Caribbean leaders going there are demanding that Britain pay billions in compensation, in reparations for the slave trade, among other things, although the British Prime Minister is saying no way. But what does your Foreign Secretary say? He's a bit on the spot, isn't he?
Well, yes, it's a curious thing that David Lammy, who isn't Foreign Secretary in a Caribbean country, but has found it convenient enough to be Foreign Secretary in Britain. Look, Keir Starmer has a big problem on his hands, which is rogue members of his government. I suspect David Lammy will be reshuffled at the next cabinet reshuffling, because he cannot stay in his post as Foreign Secretary. He's completely out of his depth. He's completely messed up with sort of the Israel-Gaza, Israel and wider Middle Eastern conflicts. And this is another example as well. I would just like to point out that the amount in reparations that is being requested is around £200 billion, which is practically about a fifth of the value of the British economy. Completely ridiculous and ludicrous. And it's incredible. If you saw David Lammy's Celebrity Mastermind performance in 2010, you would understand why his knowledge of history is so pathetic and poor, because he makes no sort of room for the fact that Britain actually ended the slave trade, and Britain incurred significant losses to actually end the abhorrent practice. He never asked the Arab countries for reparations for their role in the African slave trade, even though it was far more brutal than you could argue the transatlantic slave trade. I mean, they actually castrated millions of Black African men. So his knowledge of history not only spotty, but it's also quite selective. And these are the kinds of things that get Keir Starmer in a lot of trouble, because if you have the government saying one thing, or at least the Prime Minister saying one thing, and then members of his own cabinet saying something else, it's a very, very bad look for Britain. I highly doubt that David Lammy is going to be Foreign Secretary long into the future. I mean, the first 100 days of Keir Starmer's premiership have been a complete disaster, from, accepting over £100,000 worth of free gifts to all the leaks that have come out from Downing Street, to having to get rid of one of his top-serving, civil servants. So it's just a complete mess, and David Lammy just embodies that chaos, body and soul.
Oh, and the radicalism of what Britain has elected. Seriously, but here he has to put on his big boy pants and now realise it's not just someone shouting from the street corner. He actually has to take a responsible position. I wonder if he can live up to it. Esther Krakue, always great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.